The life of 120-year-old West Country trading ketch Bessie Ellen is a fascinating one. Worked for over 70 years across the UK and Denmark by the Chichester and Muller families. Then lovingly restored and maintained first by Ole Pedersen and then by Nikki Alford, who still owns her to this day. But how exactly does someone end up buying a century-old wooden ship for their 30th birthday and spend the next 24 years looking after her, in an age of widespread societal apathy towards such heritage conservation? In the third chapter of Bessie Ellen's story, Nikki tells us how this came to be.
So yeah, you may be interested to know how I ended up with this boat, but it's quite a long story. I was a fairly unruly teenager, and I was sent to sea, and disliked sailing ships enormously. Like, I just couldn't wait to get off. All I wanted to do was go to London and dye my hair pink and be badass. Anyway, I did that, but I had to do the sailing bit in the summer. I went to London for 3 years and did quite well. I had a job as a music journalist for a high-end paper. I was paid a lot of money. I used to not get up till 3 in the afternoon and go out till 4 in the morning with my pink hair and whatever. And then after 3 years, I was starting to get a bit jaded. And my aunt and uncle very kindly asked if I wanted to be their cook and sail from Foy in Cornwall all the way through Spain and Portugal, down the Canaries, across the Atlantic, Caribbean, and then the eastern coast of America. Well, I said, hell yeah. And I did. And I joined the boat, joined their boat in Foy, and started, I was 20. I was 20. Yeah. And helped them refit the boat ready for an Atlantic crossing, and then I stayed with them for the whole period. And it was incredible. In fact, I can remember nearly every aspect of that voyage, and it was just such an adventure. It was 16 months living on the boat and a lot of sea miles, and finally got off their ship in Maine and flew home. Yeah, 16 months after I got on in March 19 whatever it was. 1989. Yeah. Blimey, my crew weren't even thought of then. So yeah, 1989 I started my seagoing career in earnest, really, and I've had every birthday since then on board a ship at sea. So I'm quite proud of that. Definitely got salt water somewhere. Flew back home, and then very kindly, I didn't know what I was going to do. I felt a bit of sort of a lost soul. I'd done and seen so much, and all my other sort of colleagues from home were at university and just not there. So I was kind of in I felt like a loose pea in a pod going, I don't know what to do now. Anyway, I was very kindly given a job for a company called Wooden Ships Yacht Brokers in opposite Salcombe in Devon, and I went to live with the infamous Peter Gregson and family. I was sort of living in the week and going home at weekends and helping Peter. I don't know, I was pretty useless, I think, but I did a bit of babysitting, dog walking, writing, listing boats, and in those days everything was done by post before the internet. So if somebody inquired about a boat, it was either on the phone, and then you'd have to photocopy multiple boats and put them in an envelope and send them to the Inquirer. And it was during this time that I was one winter's evening cleaning out the filing cabinets. I think my secretarial skills weren't great, so I was trying to make myself busy. And in the bottom of the filing cabinet there were some really old files, and it was like, you know, the jam-packed with photos and information. And I said to Peter, what do you want me to do with these? I said, they've been there for years, he said. Well, I don't know, just sort through them and keep what's important. And I took out this pink paper file, and inside was this picture. And I was like, this is for sale, Peter? He went, yeah, but nobody crazy enough to buy that. So I stole 2 Polaroid pictures out of the file. I kept one Polaroid of the stern, and it was sort of looking up at it, and it was that sort of fantastic shape. And then the other Polaroid was of the clipper bow, and I just thought, what a pretty boat. So I kept them in my diary and kept them with me. And but I stayed with Peter for a good 9 months, and it was during my time with him that a Dutchman called Hans van der Voren came to the office. He was in the process of sailing his 2 ketches, 2 hardangerjachts back from New Zealand. Anna Christina had gone out with the first fleet in 1984, and Anna Christina was 108 years old, and Anna Rosa was 98 years old and had sailed the Pacific to New Zealand, going the other way around, sort of about 1985-86. He was moving to Tenerife, having given up his Norwegian home. He'd lived in Norway and restored these 2 hardangerjachts on these tiny islands. Again, in the sympathetic way that we go back to the story of Ulla Peidersen, Christian Lund and Otto Lett. He realised that these ships were going to be gone for good if he didn't rebuild them. He just happened to be in Norway at the time and did the same thing, but in Norway, and he drove the country collecting old blocks, old winches, everything. So when he rebuilt Anna Rosa and Anna Christina, he was able to gain all of those tactile objects, and they weren't rotten, whereas when I came to do Bessie Ellen, nothing was left. So that's why we're not as historic as we would like, but hey ho. Moving on. So I met Hans in the office. He was selling Anna Rosa to a new startup museum in the port of Douarnenez in Brittany, and they had bought her, and I was asked if I would like to join the crew, and of course it would be unpaid for 3 months, but if you like to stay on then you might be paid. Well, of course I jumped at the chance, and then it was, oh, you have to get your own flight out there. I still jumped at the chance, and in no time at all I was flying out to Auckland to join a ship very similar to Bessie Ellen, and we sailed her back on a 6-month voyage from Auckland via Australia, Christmas Island, Seychelles, Chagos, Red Sea, Mediterranean, and then I think before we got to France our last stop was Porto, before it had been refined, and finished in Douarnenez. I then stayed with Hans for 4 years. I handed over Anna Rosa to the museum, and I stayed on board and made sure it was all fine and they knew how the boat worked and everything. And then I moved on to Anna Christina, and basically we set up a business in the Canary Islands in Tenerife. We did the 1992 Columbus Tall Ships Regatta, which was round the Atlantic, starting in Lisbon and finishing in Liverpool, via Puerto Rico, New York, Boston, Liverpool. What a trip. That was the summer. Round Britain seems very tame compared to round the Atlantic. I stayed with him for 4 years, and then felt it was time to move on, and went home. Then I heard about this company called Square Sail down in Bristol, and they had a fleet of square riggers, mostly engaged in film work and day charter. So I applied for a job on there, or I inquired for a job on there and told there wasn't one, but then got a phone call back a week later and said, yeah, we've got a place for a cook. Can you cook? I was like, yeah. Okay, well, come down. And an interview took about 5 seconds, and I was just told to go and make the crew lunch. And the crew being 40 people, there was a whole shipyard, and they were in the process of moving the whole operation from Gloucester down to Charlestown in Cornwall, where Robin had just bought the harbour. So yeah, I remember sitting on the little schooner Carrie, and the chief mate coming downstairs. He was an old wiry seaman from way back when, covered in tattoos, massive hands, muscles like Popeye. And he looked at me and said, who are you? And I said, oh, I'm Nikki, I'm the new cook. He said, well, I can tell you one thing for nothing. There are 2 things that are useless on a boat. One is a bunch of flowers and the other is a woman. And he walked off, and I was just left there going, what am I supposed to do now? Anyway, I made lunch, and he actually came back for a cup of coffee, and I made him a cup of coffee, and we got talking, and he realised I'd been round a bit, done a few ocean crossings, so I was okay in his book after 2 cups of coffee. And yeah, my journey with them started. I sailed to Cornwall, and we did various film jobs throughout Europe, and I started learning a lot more about square rig and rigging itself, the art of rigging, which I liked enormously, and sail making. I joined as a cook, and then became bosun of Earl of Pembroke, and later on mate, second mate, and then mate of Cascalot. I was there for 7 years, and it was during that time that we were all together with some really interesting people who were also interested in tradition, the tradition of old ships and sail, and there were carpenters, shipwriters, sailmakers and riggers, and you got a chance to really get involved with every single bit, because of course we were re-rigging ships for movies, so the whole rig would have to come out and something else would be built up in a different form. So we learned a lot. We learned to work hard and fast. It's during that time that I fell into good company with a number of shipwrights, and I brought out the 2 photographs and I said, what do you think of that? And they were like, what? No way. And one of them, old Ted, he was really excited to see Bessie Ellen. He hadn't known that she was around, and he'd actually been part of the voyage to save another old schooner, Katie, the Katie out of Padstow. He was on the trip from, I think, Finland to the UK. They were towing her, and unfortunately she sank. They had pumps on board, but she was being towed, so it was no humans on the boat. But so he was, you know, particularly enamoured with the idea of getting a West Country ketch back home and restoring it. So I took him out to Denmark to have a look at the boat in 1996. And then I went again in 1998 for a second look with another shipwright friend and his wife, just to see what it was and see if I was mad, or if and you know, we couldn't work out. It was so fecking cold in those days in December in Denmark. It's like, is the wood frozen or is it sound? You know, is the wood hard for it being frozen, or is it sound? And it was sound. Anyway, kind of went back, and between us we drew up all sorts of projects and dreams of what we were going to do and how we were going to do it, and never looked at how much it was going to cost or anything. It was just like, yeah, we can do this. And again, because we were all so practical, it was just like, yeah, just get on and build it. However, I still got cold feet, so I kind of didn't do much about it. But then the time came and I was asked to captain a Chinese junk on an expedition from China to Oman, and I did that. And it was during that time that I realised that if I didn't do this burning ambition, this dream that I'd had, if I didn't do it soon, then I'd probably lose the opportunity or the will, or I'd go and do something else, because it had been my main focus. I'd been working towards it for years. So I got home. I remember flying in from Mumbai and went home, I think got some warm clothes and was back up at Heathrow, and I flew out to Denmark with my old captain John Bates, who was with me on the Cascalot and very much a father figure. And I said, John, will you come with me? Because I just need to know if I'm right. And I took my checkbook. Anyway, we went out there, and John said, yeah, off you go. Go and have a look at your boat, and I'll stay here in the office in the warm and talk to the shipyard owner, who only spoke Danish, so I don't know how John was going to speak to him. But anyway, they managed to communicate. And what was nice is that Cascalot had been built in that shipyard. So the ship that we'd all sailed on for so long had been built at Ring Anderson. Of course, much, much bigger, 500-ton, great thing. I mean, amazing. And John was desperate to get a picture of her, which of course the shipyard owner has hanging in his office. They are floor to ceiling, all the pictures of the ships that they've ever built, and it's about 180 boats they've built. And he found one of Cascalot, and he asked politely, please could I have a copy of that? And Peter just smirked and said, only if Nikki buys the boat. So we call that the most expensive photocopy ever because I came in and I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And yeah, the rest was history. I bought a boat and then went back to a friend of John's house who lived in Svendborg. And then we started doing numbers, and it was like, oh my gosh, what have I done? So I flew home. That was in May. So it was about my 30th birthday. So 10 years after I'd sort of first been to sea. And yeah, I was slightly shell-shocked and went back to Cascalot with John, and we sailed a couple of trips, and I think I left in sort of mid-July. I felt that I should go and do something to the boat that I'd just bought, but I didn't know what to do or where to start. Anyhow, my partner at the time, Aidan, and I, we loaded up my little car with all the tools and clothes that we needed, and we just went, off we go. And we drove all the way through Europe, got to Denmark, and literally day one built a bed on top of the old ballast, and all we had for cooking was a trangia. That was it. And we worked our way through all the main dirty jobs throughout the summer of 2000. Yeah, and we had to take out all the broken ballast, and it was about 50 tons, which is quite a large amount. And I remember that we were sleeping in the forecastle on this homemade wooden bed with a cheap mattress, and in the morning we'd get up and I had to get this broken stuff out, and we'd sit there with hammers and crowbars just breaking. It was like being at the coalface. And in the morning Peter would drop 2 skips in here, one for cement dust and one for metal, because in Denmark you had to pay to have mixed mixed rubbish, but if it was separated, we could actually get money for the iron. So of course I separated it. So I remember being sort of quite daunted by this challenge. It was only Aidan and I working on board at the time. I remember after the second day of chipping ballast, we'd only done a 2-foot section on this side, and I think I sat in the pit with my broken hands that I'd been hitting and missing, and I think I burst into tears and I said, why the hell am I doing this? And so I had a really good cry, and anyway, after that I got on with it, and it took 2 weeks for me to empty the boat of ballast, and we were working from 7 in the morning until 7 at night, and then we literally fell into bed after some rice and beans and get up and do the same thing again the next day for 2 weeks. Everything seemed to take 2 weeks. Wire brushing this cargo hatch with grinders and angle grinders and wheels, that was filthy, and that was probably why I'm mad now. It was all red lead paint from the old days, and yeah, even though we had masks and everything, I'm sure it still got in. Wire brushing the inside of all where the bunks are now, that was very, very rough after having had, 80 odd years of cargo flung into her. So again, a wire wheel on a angle grinder, just gently chipping off the really flaky bits and trying to get the ship back to a sort of polished but nice surface, which we then varnished. All the beams had to be scraped. They'd gone black. They'd been linseed oiled, and linseed oil after a period tends to just go very, very, very dark. So we had, I think I got through about 5 3-cornered scrapers after I ground them all down in that period of 3 months. But yeah, we continued, and I think the boat was quite happy. She was really, I didn't really have any worries or any cares. Life was very simple, and we kept going. Meanwhile, the shipyard was getting on with the boat out of the water, cleaning off 10 years of mussels, that stank, doing a load of planking in the bow, mostly the starboard side, some new frames. I had a deal with the shipyard owner that I could buy it for a certain amount of money, but I had to spend a lot of money in the yard. And it was like, okay. I didn't know if I could do it or not. I think he asked that I spend at least 180,000 in the yard. So I just said, okay. However, the work we did do was really good, and we kept working throughout, right way through until the following May. So from July to May it took. We installed, I bought an engine down in Holland that was driven up and installed in Denmark. The shipwrights made a new cap rail, new bulwark planking. Everything was made good that they could. No rig was put on. We didn't do anything on the rig or the house structure. I decided I was going to do a lot of that in Plymouth. It was cheaper. The shipwrights there were £45 an hour, and that was in 2000. Yes. So I literally did as much as I could, and decided if they did, they got the boat sort of sound. We'd nail all the entrances shut with some plywood sheets and plastic or tarps, and motor her back down the same route that Christian Muller had come up on his rather crazy voyage in 1947. And yeah, we did, and it was a good time. I really enjoyed my life in Svendborg. It was a community that was filled up with people on wooden boats and enthusiastic ideas of how to build ships and what to do with them and where the future was going. And it became my second home. And Peter Ring Anderson was super, super kind to I don't think they believed I would ever do what I did, and yeah, it was quite sad to leave. So the day we left, everybody was in tears, and we motored down the Sound out of Svendborg with a stumpy little mast and a big flag flying, and made our way home down the North Sea and the English Channel to Charlestown, of course, where we've been with Square Sail. We knew Robin Davis of Square Sail really well, and rather nicely, Graham, the harbour master there, his grandfather had piloted Bessie Ellen in her trading days in about 1920, 1921, and Charlestown had a boat called a hobbler, and the hobbler was where the pilot or the harbour guy would row out. Don't forget, these ships had no engines, so they had to be pulled in. And if you've seen Charlestown, it's like a sort of S-bend trying to get in there and into a lock gate. So the hobblers would row out, hitch up to the big ketch, and then row in just at a steady speed. And actually, you'll have noticed that this boat, once you get way on, she holds her way for a long time. You can not use the engine, or you can stop, and just with like a tiny bit of wind she will sail, because she was built as a sailing boat, and she's not a boat that's had sails added after being a motorboat. So the lines are all there, the shape, the knowledge of creating that perfect hull is built into the very fabric of this boat, and she is a dream to sail. But yeah, the hobbler would have come out and rowed them in, and then as you come in between the pier heads, a spring line is thrown from the shore to the bow of the ship as she passes the pier head, and then the boat goes on until midships is a beam of the knuckle. The spring is then made fast on the vessel, and that swings her around like this and lines her up for the lock gate, and then you can just walk her in. Yeah, so it was a very poignant moment to have Graham come out, even though we were under engine and we had no rigging up, just a stumpy little mast, and he loved it. And it wasn't long after he actually retired. He was in his 80s then, so I was very happy for that. And Charlestown was very good to us, met a load of friends, and everybody got very excited about this beautiful looking sailing ship. And then we went to Plymouth in September of 2001. September, we got, I'd been up and been scouting around Plymouth looking for a free berth. You know, we had no money, we had a dream, a pipe dream, but it was a pretty cool. And my initial idea had been to get the boat home to the UK and then hopefully sell her to Plymouth City, because she was built in Plymouth, probably one of the last wooden vessels built in Plymouth and nearly the whole country. So I thought, well, yeah, they're going to love it. They're going to, if we put it on their doorstep. So we went down Plymouth, and we went to Turnchapel, and there was a new water sports centre with a bit of a beach. We decided that we'd come into Plymouth and put her there on that beach, load her up with some ballast tanks to make sure she didn't fall out, and stay there. However, we couldn't stay there for very long because A, the bottom was quite hard, and B, it's not great for a boat to sit on that hard standing, and the wall wasn't good enough to support the whole vessel. So it was decided that we'd move up to Howard Marine up the Plym, just a little bit further around the corner, within sight of Turnchapel. And we went there, and that was a nice mud berth. It's a bit like where we are today, you know, 4-metre tides, so you're just looking up. But there, the river, the tide went out, and you could see under the quay all the rats squeaking and the smell of the vile mud, and it wasn't very pleasant, but it was free, and we just went, hey ho, we'll get on with this, we can live. It had a little rickety ladder, and John Howard gave us the use of a container or two as a workshop up on the quay, and as much space as we wanted, which was of course vital. Don't forget, we were having to bring in trees from the forest to make into spas and everything, so space and electricity was a real major point. And they were really, really good to us. So we got the free berth, and I brought in, it was myself, Aidan, Chris, Nathan, who came as the shipwright to start with. He was bonkers. He would drink a pint of wine at 2:00 in the afternoon and go, right, I better get started. And off he'd go to make a spa with a planer. It was like, what, a pint of wine? And they're crazy days. I left him to it. So the boat, we started the project, and we didn't have any architect plans or anything. We just said, yeah, we'll just do what we're told to by the MCA. We basically worked with the MCA throughout the whole of the rebuild. They did design where the watertight bulkheads were to go. So once that was acknowledged, it was only a matter of building everything else, and it had been my idea all the way along to keep this room open, to make it as multifunctional as possible. There were, you know, you could sleep in here, you can do sit-down dinners in here, you can take it all out and have cargo in here, you could have a good old dance if you wanted. It didn't matter, it was the space and keeping it airy as well, because of course, although cabins are really nice if you're doing sort of charter work, it's not very good for the actual boat, because it's too airless, unless you have incredible systems that force air in and fans and stuff, and you know, we're just not on that level. It's a tiny little ship really, so I decided to keep it open and get the whole boat ventilated, you know, suck air through, and it just keeps the timber smelling sweet and nice, and yeah. So I had another tearful moment where I nearly threw in the towel. I remember having a set to with the MCA, and they were just putting demands on us that we just felt we could not meet, and yeah, I was in absolute floods of tears. Also in floods of tears because Plymouth City didn't really want to know the boat at all. You know, it was like they didn't want to help us out, they didn't want to give us a berth, they didn't want anything to do with us. So we started doing it off our own back. And I actually had very little to do with the sort of daily rebuild. I was up in my little office on top of a container. We had to hold it down with ratchet straps because in the winter it would blow around. And yeah, I was just trying to get sponsorship, and we realised that sponsorship was never going to be forthcoming because we weren't a charity. So we took the angle of begging and I literally wrote letters to people who had stuff that I needed and begged, and it seemed to work. And we got a really good donation from the Astor Foundation, who donate money to young people in seafaring. They gave about £4,000, which in those days was a lot of money, and really, really helped for materials. But otherwise, I'd just go around Plymouth to all the shops and say, look, I'm this project, I need help. And things like Graham's Plumbing, you know, it's the sort of, I don't think they exist anymore. But all the showers, which we still have here today, were ex-display ones on boards, you know, that they have around the shop for the builders to look at and go, ooh, and just given those taps, sinks, the whole lot. So we fitted out really quite cheaply, and of course initially I'd only put the bunk beds in, and then my brother had a really good old big farmhouse table that we borrowed and had that on board as the table for 2 years. But it was during that time that I realised that the interest in maritime history and restorations was literally zero in Plymouth. Nobody was interested. We kind of had to rejig our plans there was me thinking I would have sold it on for a fortune and made my millions and disappear. I was rather left with the boat like an albatross and not a clue what to do with it. We started off looking at making her a scientific research boat, you know, looking at whales and dolphins, and we wrote to loads of universities wondering if it could be a platform for science, and some very helpful feedback. Certainly Bangor wrote and said it's a really good idea, but actually people who are doing research, they literally just want to go get the data and then go back and write papers on it. They don't need to be at sea doing the slow moving science that we all like to think happens. It's very quick, very modular, and sometimes very niche. So that was out. Cargo was out. I had dreams of importing carpets from Persia and sort of non-perishable goods, but the insurance on the high value cargoes was too high, so we rather shelved that one. And then it just came down to the good old sail charter game, and as much as I thought I wasn't going to like it, we do. We actually get the best of everything. We get really good sailing. It doesn't work the boat too hard. I've had a home for however many years, 25 years, 24 years, and yeah, hope she continues to enjoy her life. So going back, so Plymouth, we decided to set up as a charter boat, and then because we didn't have the money, we sailed her the first year in 2003, I think, or 2004. That was my first year. And then in 2005 we did the tall ships race up in Riga, and it was really basic down here, and we've added bits year on year. Every time we earn a bit of money, we put better light fittings in, or nicer tables, or even benches. We didn't have the seats in here for some years. It was just sitting on boxes around a few tables. So yeah, that's how it works with this boat. You earn a bit, you spend a bit, you earn a bit, you spend a bit, and each time it's where you sort of assign the money to, whether it's underwater, invisible, or whether you make it visible and choose some nice fittings. But yeah, we'll get there. The future of the boat, I mean, a lot of you'll know that she's up for sale. I'm not ready to retire, but it's very difficult to look at how I can possibly continue to run this on the operation that we do have. Unfortunately, I don't work 12 months a year anymore, which I used to, which really helped. Sadly, the Canaries is a very difficult place to work in now since Brexit. We only get 90 days, and the heat as well isn't great for such an old boat. And also, you've probably heard of the mighty teredo worm, which eats ships. They get into the planking, and it just, I was starting to get like, I don't want to be down here and allow this to happen. So I've chosen to only work the summers, or if we do work the winters, it will be up in the cold and be skiing and whale watching up in Norway, which is a possibility. But yeah, only working your sort of 7-month year, it makes it very difficult for such a big boat to earn enough to earn her keep, as well as pay all the crew, which is vital. And these days, in my day, we all work for nothing. Now they all want paying. So such is the change in society. You don't do anything for the love of it anymore. Well, I still do. So yeah, the future, I don't know what it's going to hold. She's on the market, and I hope that she finds somebody who can take her on and maybe keep me on as well. I think that would be the sort of the golden egg, is that I could stay associated with it, but slowly retire. Also, I'm not as fit as I used to be, and I'd like to have a go at something else. One of the stern, it was a close-up of the stern, and the other was a picture of the, stern, Can I do that again?
Yes.
That was
I was thinking.
Fuck, she's lost it. This is the place in Plymouth where I first brought Bessie Ellen before we rigged her up. And actually, the tyres are still in the water. So we came along this quay, which was about as close as we could get to where she was built, which is somewhere over here, and I think we should go and find out. I'll show you the slipway. Yeah, amazing, it's all still here. And we filled this whole bit. I mean, it looks massive. What are you ready, Mr. B? Is that yours?
Go on, Brack.
Boy, get it! I think that was too big, Bragg. You're going to give up? Never give up. Hang on, they're both here. Yeah. This one is the one. Well, there it is. You can just about see it from here. So this would have been his boat shed. And the shipyard, the hangars weren't here then, but he'd come from Dartmouth. I think the shipyards got very small in Dartmouth, and he felt that Plymouth would be probably more profitable for building ships, so he came here and set up on this site in probably, I think 1890, I think it was 1889, 1890, and was a few years here. And I think Bessie Ellen was one of the last boats he built, and this was the slipway where she was launched. Can't quite see it, but maybe if we go up here we can look down on it. There it is. So that would have had a railway on it. Wow. It's quite surreal, isn't it, to see it now, with just very modern yachts and a different way of working. Yeah, extraordinary. Yeah, and look over there, very, very ultra modern sailing rigs. Sailing's completely changed in 120 years to what it was. Up there beyond the commercial tankers is where John Howard gave me some wharfage, and I was able to bring in all my mates, and we had some key space for building a yard shed, and we were able to get the trees in for the masts and do everything, so it was pretty cool. But yeah, the little village of Turnchapel's just here, and this was a big village for building schooners and ketches. Quiet now. Tommy rebuilt the Garland Stone back in '97, I remember. Oh my god.
Oh, look, that's you.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Len Bagnall, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, they were quite happy to come down, weren't they?
I think my uncle's life finished when the sea finished. When the lorries took over from sailing ships for trading.
Good picture of us with our mast that came back from Denmark. That's the only thing I had up. I know, they didn't last long, did they, afterwards?
Yeah.
Gosh. Then you must have come back again when I'd fully rigged her. Everything brand new. Wow. Ever. That's so cool, thank you.